The galaxy had known peace for centuries, or at least a kind of peace, the type enforced by the iron grip of the Veil Dominion, a vast interstellar empire that claimed to bring order, stability, and enlightenment to lesser species. For most civilizations, bending the knee was easier than burning under orbital fire. They called it surrender. The Veil called it integration. But humans, they were different. The Veil had first encountered humanity 72 years ago. A single exploration vessel had landed near Jupiter's orbit, intercepting a radio signal from Earth. They assumed this primitive planet was ripe for harvesting, another low-tier civilization with little to no space defense and tribal governments. But the humans didn't bow. They didn't beg. They fired first. The result was but surprising. The Veil scout ship was obliterated, not damaged, not disabled, vaporized. That moment was documented in the Dominion's archives as the incident at Jupiter, and it was supposed to be the start of a short conflict. A cleansing, they called it. But war with humans dragged on far longer than anyone expected. Earth was chaotic, yes, divided even. But when you pointed a weapon at them, they united fast. And worse, they learned fast. Now 72 years later, humanity was no longer on the defensive. Commander Ulith Varn of the Veil battle cruiser Eshantu stood on the bridge, her 6 golden eyes locked on the holographic screen displaying a cold, black sector of space. Reports had come in, whispers of a human ship crossing into Dominion territory again. Not a freighter, not a fighter wing, a warship, but not just any warship, the Revenant, the first human vessel to enter hyperspace without using Dominion technology, a ship built in the shadow of vengeance, cloaked, armed, and rumored to carry enough firepower to level a planet in under a minute. Her second-in-command, Jarek, leaned closer, his tentacles twitching nervously. "Ma'am, if the Revenant is real, we must assume they intend to break the Treaty of Seran," Ulith scoffed. "The humans broke that treaty the day they refused to surrender their colonies. What fools build cities on the edge of Dominion space and expect peace?" But she wasn't calm. Not really. She remembered the Cavrix massacre, a Dominion outpost that was wiped off the map by a single human operative. One man, no fleet, just a stealth suit and a personal vendetta. That had changed everything. The Veil had underestimated the human thirst for revenge. Suddenly, a shrill alarm rang across the bridge. "Incoming signal, Sector 19 Beta," shouted a technician. "Something just dropped out of hyperspace." No identification, no transponder. Ulith's eyes narrowed. Visual now. The screen flickered, and space rippled like disturbed water. Out of the black void emerged a monstrous silhouette, jagged, dark, sleek like a predator. No lights, no visible ports. Just death in the shape of a warship. Silence gripped the room. A single line of human language scrolled across the screen, translated automatically by their linguistic software. "Brace yourself. A human warship is incoming." Ulith's breath caught in her throat. This was no bluff. The Revenant had arrived, and it wasn't alone. From behind the primary ship, 4 smaller vessels uncloaked. Human designs, ugly, utilitarian, all thrusters and weapons with no concern for elegance. But there was beauty in that brutality, pure function, pure threat. "Should we open communications?" Jarek asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ulith didn't answer, because at that moment Eshantu's shields flickered, then dropped. Not from a hit, not from an attack. They were disabled remotely. Impossible. EMP wave. A bridge officer shouted, "It's not Dominion tech, can't trace it." Then came the second message. "This is Commander Elise Grant of the HSS Revenant. You murdered 41,000 civilians at Alvaros Prime. You bombed our children. You bombed our hospitals. You left bodies in orbit and called it justice. We are here for repayment." The Veil crew scrambled, weapon systems armed, hull plating reinforced, defense protocols engaged. Ulith screamed, "Fire, everything!" The Revenant didn't move. It didn't need to. A flash of blinding light surged from its underbelly, a gravity rupture torpedo, a weapon no Dominion ship had ever seen. The Ashantu's hull screamed as it began collapsing inward, metal twisting as if space itself betrayed it. And then, blackness. Explosions tore through the Vael ship as the Revenant moved forward like a shark tasting blood. The Dominion had prided itself on domination through fear. But humans didn't fear domination. They'd known it, on their own planet, from each other, and they survived it. And now they'd perfected it. One Dominion ship fell, then another, and another. In less than 10 minutes, an entire fleet was burning in the void. Commander Elise Grant stood on her bridge, expression unreadable as she watched. "The wreckage drift. They called us apes," she muttered, "and now they'll call us gods." The smoke from the wreckage still floated across the void like ancient ghosts. Jagged remnants of once mighty Vael warships drifted silently, their twisted metal glowing dimly in the cold of space. The Dominion, fleet, the pride of an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds, had been reduced to scrap in less than 15 minutes. On board the HSS Revenant, the mood wasn't one of celebration. It was silence. Thick, heavy silence. The crew stared at the tactical displays, watching the aftermath. No one spoke. No one cheered. This wasn't victory. This was justice. Commander Elise Grant removed her gloves slowly, letting them drop to the metal floor of the bridge. Her face was pale, stern, tired. Not with age, she was barely 40, but with the weight of what they'd just done, what they still had to do. Her voice cut through the silence. "Status report." "Minimal energy expenditure," replied Lieutenant Harlow, a wiry man with cybernetic implants running along his skull. "EMP wave worked perfectly. Their systems were too centralized. Shields dropped before they could even rotate weapons." "Casualties?" "None. On our side, Dominion ships lost 4,327 personnel. 8 escape pods recovered. 2 were armed with self-destruct protocols, executed before we could intercept." Elise closed her eyes. "Standard Vael practice. No prisoners, no witnesses." The crew didn't react. They'd seen this before. Alvaros Prime still haunted them. That had been Elise's home, a thriving human colony on the edge of Dominion-controlled space. Once considered neutral territory, it became a target when the Vael decided humanity had grown too aggressive. No warnings, no formal declaration. They dropped fire from the skies, families burned alive, children choked in the rubble, hospitals were vaporized mid-evacuation. And when Earth sent a delegation to protest, they were told it was a disciplinary action. That was the day the HSS Revenant project was born in secret, not under the United Terran Assembly's banner, but under Elise's hand. She gathered survivors, scientists, soldiers, people who had lost everything, people with nothing left to lose, people who didn't want peace. They wanted balance, the kind that only comes from blood. "Ma'am," Harlow spoke again, softer. "This time, we just intercepted a Dominion comms relay. They've issued a general distress call. High priority. They're mobilizing the 7th Armada." Elise didn't flinch. "How long?" 4 days. Maybe 5. Depends on how fast. They move through the Kevel 6 corridor, she nodded. Then we move faster. Destination? Elise stepped forward, hands clasped behind her back, eyes cold as steel. Sector H-17, Varda system, Dominion stronghold, military communications hub. We cut off their mouth before they can bark. There was a hesitation from the crew, not because of fear, but because of what Varda represented. The Varda system wasn't just a communications hub. It was heavily fortified, with orbital cannons, AI war satellites, and a planetary shield that had never been breached. Even Vael rebels had failed to scratch its surface. But humans weren't. Rebels. They were something else now, something that crawled from the ashes. "We won't have the element of surprise at Varda," said Harlow cautiously. Elise turned her head, slowly. "Then we give them something else." She tapped the console and a holographic image blinked to life. A new weapon, something terrifying, still in testing, developed in the labs beneath Antarctica, deep under Earth's crust where Dominion spies never saw. Project Helios. A micro-singularity. Cannon. capable of collapsing localized gravity fields and punching holes through planetary defenses. It hadn't even been approved by Earth's military council, but this ship didn't fly under council orders. Revenant flew for the dead. The scientists who built Helios warned of instability, of consequences, of backfire, but Elise didn't care. Not anymore. They were past the point of fear, they were past the point of morality. All that was left now was math. For every child killed on Alvaros, a city would fall. As the Revenant turned toward Varda, a low hum began to pulse through the ship's core, engines warming for hyperspace. But Elise paused, then turned toward the intercom and opened a channel. To all human frequencies. Her voice echoed through colonies, space stations, and deep space relays. This is Commander Elise Grant of the HSS Revenant. We have destroyed the Dominion's 12th Fleet. We are now en route to Varda. This is not a war of conquest. This is not revenge. This is repayment, measured and delivered. If any humans still believe in silence, I advise you to stay out of our way, because this time, Earth is not kneeling. On Vial Prime, high above its Golden Palace towers, alarms began to ring. And across a dozen Dominion sectors, one phrase began spreading. Like wildfire among soldiers, civilians, and diplomats. Brace yourself, a human warship is incoming. The Revenant tore through hyperspace like a sharpened blade, slicing into the galaxy's throat. Inside, the ship's core roared with barely contained energy, its hull groaning under the weight of impossible power. It wasn't sleek like the Dominion's cruisers, nor majestic like the regal Vial dreadnoughts. It was brutal, ugly, and terrifying. A vessel of war, forged in the fires of grief and vengeance. In the command deck, dim red lighting bathed the crew in shadows. Commander. Elise Grant stood silently in front of the forward screen, staring into the void, her expression carved from stone. Around her, the rest of the bridge was intense preparation, final system checks, weapon diagnostics, reactor stability sweeps. They were headed straight for Varda, the Dominion's crown jewel of military communication. Every order for every warzone passed through its encrypted channels. Disabling it wouldn't just cripple their fleets, it would paralyze the entire Dominion response for days. Maybe even weeks. But everyone knew Varda wasn't just another target. It was a suicide run. Lieutenant Dax Harlow tapped a control panel, his voice low. We're 4 hours out. Dominion will detect us in 90 minutes max. If they're smart, they'll have already scrambled defense drones and planetary shields. They're not smart, Elise replied. They're arrogant. Her words echoed, and a few of the bridge crew exchanged glances. It wasn't false bravado. They all knew it. The Veil had underestimated humans from day one, called them savages, called them untempered primates. But the only thing more dangerous than a violent species was a wounded one. Harlow cleared his throat. And if they're not arrogant, then we improvise. Behind Elise, a new figure stepped forward. Dr. Rhea Solis, the lead physicist on the Helios project, the Revenant's most dangerous weapon. Her long dark hair was tied back, but the sleepless nights etched under her eyes betrayed her anxiety. Commander, we're not ready to deploy the Helios cannon, she said softly. The gravitational collapse matrix is still unstable. If the core destabilizes mid-charge, Elise turned, her voice cold and final. We have one shot at this. If Varda stays online, the Dominion swarms Earth before we can breathe. We can't afford to be careful. Solis opened her mouth to protest, then thought better of it. She'd lost her brother in the bombing of Alvaros. Prime. Her argument died in her throat. Suddenly, the Revenant's proximity alarms began to wail. Contacts, barked Harlow. Multiple Dominion vessels just decloaked, 4 cruisers, 2 heavy frigates positioning to block our path. The bridge came alive in a blur of noise and light. Crew rushed to battle stations. Weapon systems engaged. Shields rotated. Elise took one step forward, her voice rising above the chaos. Activate phase prism cloak. Drop drones at intervals. Keep them guessing. Outside, the Revenant shimmered, and then vanished. Not just cloaked, but split into flickering, holographic echoes across multiple vectors. A dozen ghost ships appeared in the void, each mimicking the real thing. The Dominion opened fire immediately, plasma bursts lighting up the darkness, but every hit passed through an illusion, and when the real revenant emerged, it was already behind them. Target the lead cruiser's reactor. Fire pulse beam now. A searing white lance of energy burst from the revenant's hull. The Dominion cruiser spasmed, then exploded in a blinding flash, taking one of its escorts with it. "Elise, they're regrouping," shouted Harlow. "Frigates are flanking!" Elise's eyes didn't waver. "Release Helix mines, let them flank!" From the Revenant's undercarriage, 2 spinning projectiles launched and detonated silently, releasing shimmering gravitational traps. The first Dominion frigate veered too close, caught in the pull, crumpling like a tin can before shattering entirely. 3 down, Harlow said breathlessly. 1 cruiser turning to flee. Elise watched the retreating ship. "Don't chase," she said coldly. "Let them run, let them scream." And they would. The Veil weren't used to fear, they were used to control. And now the control was slipping. The Revenant passed into the Varda system 2 hours later. On approach, they saw it, a fortress moon surrounded by rings of defense satellites, automated turrets and Dominion cruisers in formation. The entire planet pulsed with energy, an armed hornet's nest ready to burn anything that moved. Elise gave the order, all weapons hot. "Initiate breach protocol." The lights dimmed, power rerouted. The ship shuddered. From deep within its bowels, the Helios cannon began to charge. Dr. Solis whispered a prayer, not because she believed in any god, but because what they were about to unleash had no name in science, only in myth. The screen turned white. A soundless burst erupted from the Revenant's core, like a star being born in reverse. The gravity around Varda bent, warping the field, snapping every artificial satellite in 2 like dry twigs. The planet's shield flared, then cracked, then shattered. Shock rippled across the Varda command towers. Dominion officers screamed orders. Too late, the second Helios charge fired. This time it punched a hole through the crust of the planet. The explosion was muted from space, but on the surface, it was hell unleashed. Buildings collapsed, communications blacked out. The control relay. At the heart of Dominion Command Corps gone. Elise stood in silence as the shockwave cleared. Her voice was low and calm. "Varda is offline." Harlow turned slowly toward her. "That's it. You did it." But Elise didn't look victorious. She just whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "We haven't even started yet." Behind them, in the blackness of space, new signals appeared. The E. Dominion's 7th Armada had arrived, and they were angry. The Revenant hovered silently in the cold orbit of Varda, surrounded by the drifting corpses of broken ships and flaming debris. Smoke curled across the stars. Below them, the surface of Varda burned in silence. Its proud towers and reinforced communication centers, nothing more than glowing ash. Humanity had just punched a god in the throat, but there was no time to celebrate, because the 7th Dominion Armada had arrived, 52 warships, 8 dreadnoughts, hundreds of drone carriers and AI-controlled interceptors. Commander Elise Grant stood frozen before the tactical display, her jaw clenched. They'd expected retaliation, but not this fast and not this massive. The Dominion had not just come to fight, they'd come to end the Revenant. "All power to shields," she barked. "Run silent protocols, no broadcasts, no comms, they'll be listening." "Aye," said Lieutenant Harlow, already working his terminal, hands shaking slightly. "They're fanning out, wide net, they're trying to encircle us." Dr. Solis staggered into the bridge, sweat on her brow. "Helios is offline, core is hot. We need a full reactor cooldown or we risk meltdown if we fire again." Elise nodded grimly. "We won't survive long enough for another shot." She turned to the rest of the bridge. "We're not winning this with weapons, we win this with fear." She activated the internal comms. "All hands, listen. You know what this is. This is the moment they warned their children about. We have 1 ship against a fleet, but we're humans. We come from a species that's been dying since birth and still refused extinction." She paused. "They expect us to run. We won't. They expect us to surrender. We can't, so we give them what they truly fear, a cornered human with a reason to kill." Her voice turned into ice. "Prepare to break their gods. The Dominion fleet moved in perfect coordination, rows of ships shaped like daggers, glowing with eerie blue light. At their head was Grand Marshal Akrel Voss, one of the most feared military leaders in the galaxy. He'd crushed 7 rebellions in his lifetime, personally executed dissenting kings, and once bombed an entire moon to stop a whisper of uprising. He stared coldly at the Revenant on his screen. A single ship, outgunned, outnumbered. And yet, it hadn't retreated. Why? "They're stalling," he said to his bridge crew. "Deploy electronic jammers, fry their stealth systems. If they want to fight, give them annihilation." But what Voss didn't know, couldn't know, was that the Revenant wasn't just a ship, it was a trap. Inside its hull, dozens of stealth drones, undetectable, silent, and suicide-coded, were released. Each one programmed with a single purpose: disable key command ships in the Armada. Not through brute force, but with chaos. 10 minutes later, explosions began rippling across the Dominion formation. Command relays blinked out. AI synchronization collapsed. One dreadnought spun off course, blind and confused, firing at its own cruiser. And then came the Revenant. She surged forward, targeting weak points revealed by the chaos. Her cannons roared. Not Helios this time, but the brutal conventional firepower of railguns and plasma missiles. Ship after ship was struck in the throat, torn open like paper. They'd always thought humans were tactical children, that they relied on emotion, not planning. But this was warfare turned psychological. Inside the Dominion flagship, Grand Marshal Voss roared in fury. "They're inside our damn systems! Block them!" Too late. The Revenant had hacked Dominion command protocols using stolen tech from captured vile officers. Their own encryption keys were now being used against them. One by one, the Dominion ships turned silent. Some lost control of their turrets, some lost oxygen. One entire battleship ejected its own bridge crew into space. The Dominion's pride was crumbling. They'd brought an armada to a knife fight, and the humans brought madness, but every victory had a price. On the Revenant, warning lights flashed red across the bridge. "We've got breaches on deck 3 and 5, Harlow shouted. "Enemy boarding parties. They launched micropods while we were striking." "Send counter-squads," Elise ordered. "Don't let them near the core." Blaster fire erupted deep inside the ship. Screams echoed through the comms. The corridors became war zones. Human Marines fought hand-to-hand with Viel shock troopers. Blood splashed the walls. Smoke choked the air. Dr. Solis crouched in the engine chamber, hands working furiously over the Helios core. "It's overheating," she cried. "We can't hold much longer." Elise's voice crackled through the internal comms. "Solis, can we fire one more shot? If we do, the core will melt down. Can you direct the meltdown?" There was a long silence. "Yes, but it'll destroy us too." Elise looked around the bridge, at her crew, at the lights flickering overhead, at the damage reports scrolling faster than she could read. She closed her eyes, then opened them. Do it. Inside the heart of the Revenant, the Helios cannon began to burn white-hot. Energy surged, reality bent. The ship's structure groaned like it was dying. And then Elise spoke into one final transmission, a broad-frequency message to the entire sector. "To the vile Dominion, you thought Earth was weak, you thought we'd kneel. But every species has a breaking point. And you crossed ours. You brought war to our children, now we bring war to your gods. Brace yourselves, this is not the end, this is only the beginning." The Helios core ignited. A silent bloom of impossible light erupted across the void. The Revenant was gone, but so was the heart of the Dominion Armada. In the silence that followed, in the smoking remains of Varda and the broken bones of the Dominion fleet, one thing was clear. Humanity had lost a ship, but it had gained something far more terrifying: a legacy. The debris field stretched for hundreds of kilometers, a graveyard of twisted steel and drifting corpses. Chunks of once mighty Dominion warships floated like broken teeth across the black. In the center of it all there was nothing, no trace of the Revenant, no signal, no wreckage. Just a quiet hole where something powerful used to exist. The Helios. Detonation had not only wiped out a major portion of the 7th Armada, but it had fractured the very laws of space in that region. A rift, a shimmering volatile wound, now pulsed where the Revenant had made her final stand. Even Dominion sensors couldn't scan it. Ships that wandered too close, lost contact, and never returned. It became known in whispers as the human scar. But death wasn't the end, not for Elise Grant. She woke in silence, cold, floating. The interior of a cramped escape pod blinked weakly with life support warnings. A single beacon pulsed red, broadcasting a human-encoded distress signal on a narrow frequency. She didn't know how she'd survived. Maybe Solis had jettisoned her at the last second. Maybe the AI had made the choice. Maybe fate had decided. Her war wasn't finished. She coughed hard. Blood, cracked ribs, dislocated shoulder, but alive. Through the tiny viewport, she saw the edge of the rift, spinning slowly like a storm of stars collapsing in on themselves. And beyond that, nothing but emptiness. Then, motion, a flicker, a ship. At first she thought it was Dominion, a cleanup squad coming to finish what the fleet couldn't. But then the outline cleared. Human. It wasn't military. It wasn't even well armed. Just a modified freighter, rusted, at the joints painted with scavenged parts. A voice crackled through the pod's comms. Unidentified human life form. We've got your signal. You're not going to believe this, but people have been telling stories about you, real ghost ship shit. Thought you were a myth. Elise tried to speak. Couldn't. The voice continued, softer this time. We've got you, Commander. Welcome home. 2 weeks later, in a hidden orbital station outside Dominion Reach, Elise stood before a ragtag group of humans, ex-Marines, engineers, exiles, even pirates. Some had tattoos of the Revenant burned into their arms. Others had lost limbs to the war and still came back to fight. They looked at her like a saint. She hated it. I'm not a hero, she told them, her voice hoarse. We don't need heroes, said one woman from the back. We need someone who knows how to burn gods. The destruction of Varda and the loss of the Seventh Armada shattered the Dominion's illusion of control. For the first time in centuries, rebellions sparked across its outer colonies. Species they'd enslaved for generations rose up. Communications collapsed. Trade routes fractured, and everywhere humans appeared. Not fleets, not armies, but one ship at a time, one cell, one whisper, one name. The Revenant still lives. Of course, the ship was gone. But the idea, the symbol, had taken root. They tried to crush humanity. And in doing so, they made them into something worse than dangerous. They made them eternal. On Vale Prime, High Marshal Zerath Voss stood alone, in the Hall of Banners, staring at the wall where victorious campaigns were engraved in platinum. His armada, his name, his legacy, it was no longer there. Wiped, sanitized by the Senate, erased to avoid shame. The Dominion didn't speak of the Revenant anymore, but in private, they feared it even as they rebuilt, even as they prepared for retaliation. They whispered, "Brace yourself, a human warship is incoming." Back in deep space, in a hidden hangar carved into an asteroid, engineers worked on a new hull, sleeker, faster, more silent than any before. On the side of the frame, painted in black over burnished steel, was a single word, Revenant 2. And watching from the shadows, Elise Grant stood with a faint smile on her lips and fire in her eyes.